This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, iZotope, Native Instruments, LEWITT, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the LEWITT PureTube microphone through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre mixed through iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show, and there's some great deals waiting for you there. Now get ready to rock.
I need to actually act on these ideas I've had. And LEWITT was sort of born out of that, with this idea of not everything that has been done with microphone technology has been done yet. So there's more to do, more to innovate on, rather than just looking to the past and recreating traditional circuits, that there's some ways that we can solve problems for modern music creators.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey, Rockstar, come on over here. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from iZotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off over at iZotope.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Brian K. Fisher, a Seattle-born musician, mixer, and producer, currently residing in Boston, Mass., but currently in this moment here at the Toy Box Studio, or at Recording Studio Rockstars headquarters, the podcast booth. By day, he works as a marketing manager for LEWITT, an innovative Austrian microphone and audio company, and on nights and weekends, he's producing, mixing, and writing as much music as possible. Does that sound like all of us rock stars? Probably. Hopefully. The music part. Shaped by Seattle's eclectic and tight-knit indie music scene, he's been producing and performing music under the moniker Eastern Souvenirs for the past 10-plus years, and mixing, engineering, and producing for other like-minded bands and artists for the past 3 years. His remote mixing business has steadily grown as home recording and virtual collaboration became a standard practice and a budgetary necessity in modern record making. Brian loves to help bands overcome obstacles of home recording and achieve the artistic vision they hear in their heads. He's also been a consistent presence on LEWITT and iZotope's YouTube channels, sharing home recording and mixing tips for aspiring producers. Rock stars, I've got a discography and a playlist so you can go listen to the music that Brian has made, both as an artist and as a producer. And of course, we'll include links to YouTube channels too, so you can go catch some of these great teaching videos. It's really good stuff. So a shout out and a thank you also to our mutual friend, Randy Fuchs, I think, for making our original introduction. Please welcome Brian K. Fisher to Recording Studio Rockstars. Brian, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm so ready. Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you here in the studio, dude. And I guess we should begin by saying, a lot of times I'm using my usual go-to dynamic mics for the podcast interviews, but today we decided to do something special, and I have just hooked up these LEWITT LCT1040 TS microphones. So let us know how we sound, rock stars.
Yeah, it's awesome. This is actually one of my favorites from LEWITT's lineup. So
this particular mic?
Yeah, the 640. What
about it do you dig?
Just such a flexible mic. And it's just one of those mics where, like, you hear an instrument in a room, you put the mic on the instrument, you listen back, and it sounds just like you heard it in the room. It's just gives you such an accurate, clear picture of whatever you're recording. So
that's cool.
It's a great go-to for sure.
That's cool. Do you think of it as a dark mic, a bright mic, a flat mic, or you just think of it as more, when you say you put it in front of it and it gives you an accurate depiction? Sometimes I think about measurement mics have that quality too, where it's like, it's just like a true photograph, like a very realistic photograph.
Yeah. So I think with these mics, there is a bit of presence to them. They do have a modern sound, whereas, sometimes the, more vintage inspired mics can kind of have a bit of roll off and sound like they're taming that source, which to my ear, I feel like, this particular microphone, it just sounds really nice out of the gate. And I feel like I have to do less to it to get it where I want it in the mixing stage later. So, LEWITT, we call it a record ready sound. And it definitely leans more modern aesthetically in its tonal balance. Yeah, so, that's the best way I can kind of describe kind of the LEWITT sound and the 640 in particular.
Yeah, I've always been impressed with the LEWITT mics. They sound super high fidelity to me in a good way,
exactly.
Because I've been using them for years. The first time I discovered them, we were taking a bunch of the LEWITT mics down to my Bonnaroo hay bale studio, and so we were using them in these really fast-paced, high-demanding sessions where it's like, the band comes in and you got 10 minutes to sound check them, and you're recording 3 songs in an hour and they're out the door, and it's all in one space. But I do love the way they sound. And one of the things that really strikes me too is they are known to have an incredibly low noise floor, almost pretty non-existent,
Yeah.
Especially these 640s too, right? Is that true across the board for LEWITT mics? Maybe the tube mics, maybe tubes don't give you quite as low a noise floor. I don't know exactly, but what is it about that? Is that part of the important design criteria, the low noise floor?
Yeah, totally. I think, that's a big consideration, making sure the specs on these mics are the best that they can be. And in particular, we have the LCT540S, which has like ridiculously low self noise of like 4 dB or something like that,
right.
Pretty much as low as you can go. So that's kind of the standout. And then the 640, I think is, slightly higher, like 6 or 7 dB, but still incredibly low. The tube mic's a little bit higher. But
that's probably what we like about tubes too. It's like analog tape.
I don't necessarily know if the noise floor, but definitely the harmonics. So we just came out with a tube mic where we purposefully were like, let's get the noise floor as low as we can possibly do. And that's the pure tube.
Right.
And so the idea was like, yes, you want harmonics from a tube mic circuit, but like the hiss and the noise, like I don't think most people necessarily want that in their recording. So, if you want that, there's plenty of plugins that have noise generators.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I steered us in a wrong direction with that. It's almost like, so rockstars, it's not like there's noise in the mic. But what is so striking is sometimes I do recordings where I've done really intimate acoustic guitar stuff. I've just done solo piano stuff before. And what's interesting is you can have these mics that work great for rock bands in the studio, mics, preamps, stuff like that. But then sometimes you do, a very, very naked recording and you realize you're like, oh, those are the times where I've had to gain up a different microphone. And recently I brought in a Grace M201 preamp and hooked up these two 640s, and I turned it all the way up. I mean, this is like Big Bang Theory kind of gain in the microphone. And I was listening and I was like, I hear nothing. Like there's no noise at all. It's so to me, that's what's really cool about these LEWITT mics and having that ability to gain something up so much with the right microphone preamp patch too. And I know you guys are also making interfaces now and preamps. But it's striking because when you have a really great condenser mic and it's so hot, it's almost like you discover a whole new palette of sounds that you can use in music and production.
Yeah. It's kind of a whole new level of detail that you can capture. And I mean, I think that's why, the LEWITT mics have become popular for, sample libraries and Foley artists, sound designers as well. Because, you can capture just the quietest, little percussive sounds or, like you said, fingerstyle acoustic can be extremely quiet. And that can really reveal the noise floor on your equipment, both, microphones and preamps. So then it becomes a lot more crucial.
And we'll get to it, but there's a lot of fingerpick acoustic I noticed in your discography. So you know a lot about that. We'll be talking about that. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. I always go on these tangents. Tell us about, give us a brief overview of who you are and how you got, did you start out as a, taking particular instrument or learning something as a kid and, bring us to where you are now?
Yeah. So, like many, I learned on guitar. That was the first instrument that really, captured my imagination.
Acoustic or electric?
Acoustic. And so I remember I picked up acoustic. I learned some, strummy songs, but then very, very soon I was like, I want to do guitar solos. So my first attempt at kind of getting into more like electric guitar was taking my acoustic electric, plugging in one of those, those portable amps where you can like plug it into the jack and plug in headphones. And it's like kind of an all-in-one like amp simulation type thing. And so your acoustic had a pickup built in. So it had a pickup built in.
Fancy. You started with a fancy guitar.
And so I used one of these cheap kind of amp simulation things with a headphone jack. And I used an aux cord to plug the headphone jack into my home stereo system. And that was like my amplifier. And
nice,
I was like
man.
trying to shred solos in there. Eventually I did get an electric guitar and started doing that too. But
was it like a Zoom or were you going old school? I mean, you I guess you weren't in Boston at that point maybe, but like the Rockman or something?
Oh, for like
the Tom Schultz Rockman. Did you ever get to play with one of those guys?
Is that an amp simulator you're talking about?
So I'm not an expert on this, but I recently was learning more about it. So if Rockstars, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Tom Schultz had the band Boston and also like built gear, and he was responsible for building the Rockman, which was the first little battery pack portable.
Oh, interesting.
Like plug your guitar and plug your headphones in, and you've got this solid state distorted guitar sound. And I think that's also the sound of a lot of the guitars on the Boston records.
Interesting. I didn't know that, but yeah, I have no idea what it was. Honestly, I got it from some, the local guitar shop nearby, and it was like, this will work for now.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I mean, and there's so many of those kind of fun things to explore now. I mean, now you pick up a guitar and there's plugins that give you great amp sounds and just get up and go,
Yeah. So anyway, guitar was, my first jump into music. And then, pretty quickly, I kind of got bored of just learning other people's songs and wanted to write my own. So started doing that and trying to, do a bit of an acoustic singer-songwriter thing. And then, played in bands in high school and in college. And yeah, and then, I have a project now where I'm continuing to make music that's based around guitar, but, incorporating, other instruments, synthesizers and drums and bass and everything else, and kind of creating the productions myself. But yeah, I guess I started primarily as an artist and then got more into the technical side just out of necessity.
So you have tell us about what your studio looks like now. So I picture, you got guitars, you got amps, but you also sort of like, is the MIDI keyboard sort of front center for you now?
So it is, or maybe it was actually, because it used to always be up, and now maybe less so. Because I recently I've been doing a little bit more kind of straightforward rock, instrument arrangements. But in the past, my music was a little bit more synth heavy, and so that was kind of a bigger thing. I have a couple little synthesizer modules. I have like the Pro One kind of module from Behringer as a mono synth, and then the Roland Boutique Series Juno 106 module that I'll plug into my MIDI controller as well, and then soft synths, obviously.
You got any favorite soft synths or go-tos for yourself, or do you just try and have them all?
So it's funny because for the longest time I just only used Logic stock stuff, because I think in my head I've always just been like, I should use what I have available because there's just so much potential there, rather than just jumping into buying more and more stuff. So I've tried to like force myself to do more with less. And then I got the Juno module, and that's primarily what I tend to use for synthesizer. I'm like, I'll hear a sound in my head and try to create that on the Juno, or the Pro One if it's more.
Yeah, how big is the Juno? Is that like a little one rack space kind of thing, or?
Yeah, it's like
box?
This tiny little module that like has a keyboard that it can click into, or you can just plug it via MIDI to a larger MIDI keyboard, which is what I do.
Yeah.
And then you can store presets there. It has basically all the same controls as like the traditional Juno 106,
which is such a classic. I just think of bass sounds like boom, boom,
or
whatever, But synth stuff is super fun, and I'm always exploring like that balance between an actual analog modular kind of synth or semi-modular and getting sounds that way versus a keyboard, which is a little bit digital. Like I have the DeepMind, the Behringer,
mm-hmm.
and then the vast soundscape of stuff that's in the computer, like Native Instruments Complete and all those synthesizers. They're so fascinating, and it expands so quickly. It's almost, do you ever feel like you can't even keep up with all the stuff there, and you have to just to like forgive yourself a little bit and be like, you know what? I'm just going to find one that sounds cool and pick a preset and use it, and that's good.
Yeah, like I got Complete 13, I think, and had, a huge library from Native Instruments now. And I've only barely dipped my toe into that, kind of as I need something. I recently was like, I want a better Rhodes sound. So, figure out what in the library do they have for that and download that as I need it. Because otherwise it's just too overwhelming and too much, file space and all of that.
Yeah, so. I think that's kind of true for the studio in general too, because it can be overwhelming how many things there are to learn. Mm-hmm. And when you take that mindset, like you said, whereas you just decide like, well, what do I need next? And then you give yourself permission to like go figure it out and go learn it. And
even like when you hit a wall
and pedals, and amps,
Totally. Yeah, I think for me, it's like when I feel like, all right, I've kind of done everything interesting that I think I can with this drum sample pack or this synth, VST or whatever it is. And it's like, all right, now it's time to look for some new inspiration.
So tell us a little bit more about your studio now. Like, what do you moved not too long ago too, or?
I did move from Seattle to Boston in, I guess that was early 2019.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, I've been there a little while, and yeah, I had a very, very minimal setup, and it really was just kind of bare bones to be able to create music for myself. And then when I started kind of working with some friends and producing and mixing for them, I really loved it. And I immediately would reinvest any money I got from those projects back into upgrading different pieces. So right now,
it's an endless cycle.
It is. It really is. And I try to be as good as I can about not overdoing it just because something's new and shiny. But I recently upgraded my studio monitors. I have some Kali IN5s, the 3-ways. Love those. Those are great fit for my room. It's like kind of a 12 by 13 guest room. And I have some simple acoustic treatment that I just built myself, just some 4-inch panels with mineral wool around the studio. And and then I recently upgraded to a standing desk for my studio. So I have
right on
the monitors
sit on the desk too.
Yeah, I built like a custom 3U, I guess 6U kind of rack for the top of the desk. And then the monitors sit on isoacoustic stands on top of that. And I know that, it limits you in terms of speaker positioning, but it just is way more convenient for me, and it works for now.
Well, the funny thing about speaker placement too is when we like pause and analyze, like, what are we really doing in the studio? And if you're producing music, there's a lot of stuff you do that is not about sweet spots, mixing sweet spots. It's about like moving about and playing an instrument and like being comfortable and being creative.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I think there's a lot to be said for just learning your room and finding something that works for you, even if it's not perfectly textbook accurate, flat frequency response. I think for me, the main goal is always like, I want my monitoring set up to sound correct to me. When I listen to my favorite songs, everything feels like it's sitting where it should. And then I can feel confident in the decisions I'm making mixing.
Yeah, I mean, even in my room where I've got the greatest monitors I've ever had since I've worked, it's like, it's very hi-fi. The truth is, a lot of times I don't even need them in the moment. Like, just think about the volume issue. It's like you're working, you can't listen at like big, loud levels all day too. Sometimes you just, turn stuff down and it's quiet and you're just making like decisions that anything goes. It's like you're just listening to timing of drums, or you're just listening to a part, or.
Totally. Yeah. And that's another thing. So with the standing desk, I find like when I'm doing those like editing tasks, like that's stand-up time, because you don't really need to be in a tuned position.
Right.
And so it's nice to have that. And then when critical listening is more important, then, I'll bring it back down to the proper setting where I've somewhat calibrated things. And I use SonarWorks to kind of help flatten out the response a bit. I tried going without it, and then, just listening and running a bunch of measurements with Room EQ Wizard was just like, no, this is really helping my room and these speakers to sound right to me. So it's something I still use.
Now, let's keep talking about home studio setups too. Mm-hmm. So you're in this 12 by 13 room. What do you think your ceiling height is?
It is 8 feet, which is not great.
Yeah, it's better than 12 though.
Is it?
Well, because you don't want a 12 by 12.
Yeah, sure.
You don't want anything
that's
close
true.
to a cube,
Yeah, the thing with 8 feet is like your ear is kind of right in the middle between the ceiling and the floor. So I've done some experiments with like, holding panels over the listening position and taking measurements, and it's definitely seems like there are some problems from the ceiling height, but it's a rental, so I feel like I can't install a huge heavy ceiling cloud. I just have some like basic foam dampening above the listening position, so I don't have slap back, and that works okay for now.
Do you feel like your monitoring setup works better at a particular volume? Like, for example, if you turn it up loud, does it create more challenges in monitoring than if you listen to things quietly, for example?
I would say I don't listen like super, super loud. I mean, I have a neighbor upstairs, so maybe that's part of the reason. But also, I feel like I don't, unless I like really need to kind of feel the low end, especially like with like kick drums and bass, like kind of cranking it up to really kind of feel how that's sitting and working together can be helpful. But yeah, in general, it's, a fairly moderate volume that I'm mixing at all the time. I don't know the exact, what decibel level I typically monitor at, but
yeah, I always just wonder that, like, it seems like cranking speakers up is more likely to activate the modes of a room and maybe exaggerate problems. I mean, like cranking up speakers and trying to judge your bass and drums and stuff like that. And we will come back to that because your productions sound freaking amazing. And your own band, Eastern Souvenirs, there's some of the tracks in the playlist Rockstars. Check those out. The first two songs just knocked me out. Undertow and Treading Water, when I was just driving home from my daughter's soccer game last night. I'm like, listening, getting ready for the podcast, and I was like, damn, and I just cranked them in the car. And the drums just sound killer, man. Really,
Thank
really
you.
good.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And I don't think it was just because we won the district semifinal championship that I was so happy about your mixes. I think it's because they were that good. So let's keep talking a little bit about, one of the things you've done over at LEWITT, and I think you did this for Isotope too, was you've done a lot of video content. Just talk a little bit about that. Like, what was the intention for you? What was fun about making some videos? And are there any favorites you think the rock stars should check out?
Oh yeah, no, that's it's a really fun thing for me. I think getting into creating video content and sharing, ideas and knowledge. I think there's so much out there, but that's how I really learned. It's like absorbing all of that. And I think what I find useful about it is sharing things to try. Not giving people rules that like you have to do it this way or this is the proper way. You need to record something or mix something, but like, try this because it's worked for me and been awesome. And so, yeah, with LEWITT, I think I always try to approach it from like a home studio perspective of like, here are some things that I've found helpful for how to record acoustic guitar in a home studio environment, which is going to have different challenges than in a professional studio. And so that's one, a video that I think's continued to grow in views and reach more people is the how to record acoustic guitar and how to mix acoustic guitar in a home studio on the LEWITT channel. And so, yeah, those are some videos to check out. I've also done a lot on vocals because vocals seem really straightforward. It's, you put a mic up and you sing into it. It's like, you don't necessarily think of all these different mic placements and stereo techniques like you do with other types of instruments, but I think there's still a lot of nuance to it and a lot of things to try and experiment with to improve what you're getting out of either yourself, if you're recording your own voice, or, a friend that you're recording in your home studio. So yeah, I've done a handful of things recently on vocal production. I think there was 5 different delay tricks for vocals that just came out, and layering vocals. So like harmonies and doubles and octaves, whisper tracks, how to effectively use those to enhance your arrangements.
Look, if you're like me, then you love having cool instruments in your studio, right? No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments and sounds you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then adding awesome overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Use the code ROCK10 now to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples, all over at nativeinstruments.com. Hell yeah, dude, because those are some of the questions I've got for you. So again, Rockstars, listening to Brian's discography, there are just some really sweet vocals in there. Your own voice included on your music, and then also the records that you're producing. Very lush, sounding vocals, harmonies, great use of reverbs and effects in the background and stuff like that. Just you got this punchy track, then you get the sort of wash of vocals. So I'm excited to talk about that. How do you like to record your vocals? Have you found some favorite mics for yourself? Are you always trying different stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's definitely evolved quite a bit. I think when I very beginning of getting into recording, I had, one of the MXL 990 condensers.
Right.
And that was like the only mic I had. I got, used from my friend for like $30 and was rocking that into a Scarlett interface. And then, eventually I was like, oh, I want to upgrade this. So I DIY upgraded the capsule and the circuit and was using that on vocals. And I got a cheap tube compressor preamp combo from Art.
Oh yeah, those ones are great, man. I don't have the compressor, but I have the tube mic pre. I actually use that. I hooked that up to my talkback mic in the studio.
It was shocking how much it did seem to help compared to just going into a Focusrite Scarlett or whatever. And so, I was using that. And then for a time, the SM7B, because that seemed to be the trendy thing. And then, now I have access to a lot more microphones. I think, working for a microphone company, it's been amazing. And I've been obviously loving the LCT1040 is just such a phenomenal microphone. And so for my own vocals, that's definitely the go-to microphone because it can do so much. It does. It's
got some trickery in there.
4 different, tone characteristics for the tube circuit. And then you have a parallel FET circuit that has its own frequency response and you can blend them. So when it comes to my own vocals or recording other people in my studio space, the 1040, is always a safe choice because you can just adapt it for whatever you're doing.
So let's break that down a little bit more. And I think it's cool to hear you talk about recording your own vocals because I know that the majority of our listeners, the rock stars, are recording other people as well, but are also recording themselves. And in our heart, that's always the thing that drives us. It's I want to make some music,
Totally.
And so with that are accompanying challenges of recording yourself too. So the 1040, you said it has 4 different tone characteristics for the tube. What does that mean?
Yeah. So they're called, the first one is clear. So it's a very modern, minimal saturation and harmonics, kind of fairly clean, modern tube mic sound. And then you have warm, which is a little bit tamed in the high end. It's a little kind of flatter sounding, or not flatter sounding, but the frequency response is a bit flatter. So it comes across as a little bit more kind of rich in the low end. And I think there's a slightly more saturation there. And then dark, which is even more rolled off. Not quite ribbon mic sounding, but more in that direction. And then saturated, which gives you a very, modern, lively sound, but has more harmonics. So you get a little bit more low end response out of the mic that way too. From a vocalist, you get more of that kind of chest tone. And it's not a super obvious saturation by any means, but it definitely does something tangible to the sound of vocals. And yeah, the cool thing is, I think of the blend knob as kind of a wet dry where if you're in dark mode and it's that's slightly too dark, you can just kind of roll it back and do 50-50 tube dark mode and FET, and you get some of that brightness back. So that's where it becomes really flexible and can transform into whatever you want it to be.
So I am familiar with the LCT940 because that's what I have in my studio. That's what we took down to Bonnaroo. And I was really struck by same thing. With that one, it's got a tube circuit and it's got a FET circuit. And I'd go out and I'd listen. The tube would have this, richness quality to it. And then the FET, it's the same thing. It's it sort of brought the detail forward in the sound, which I thought was really cool. It's you could dial it back and get a little bit more enunciation and fricatives. I just thought of that word in the vocal, but it's very cool. So now, did you find one of those tube settings you liked the most for your own voice, or are you constantly trying different things for different songs?
I've gone back and forth between clear and warm, I guess primarily, but it depends a bit on the song. I think I'm more likely to gravitate towards just the clear setting. And then, my signal chain kind of adds its own color and character to that. But yeah, depending certain songs, I feel like I want the high end to be a little bit less airy and warm, kind of feels like a better fit. So
how do you think it's accomplishing this? Is it sort of like circuit design kind of stuff, or is it sort of EQ filter stuff that's incorporated into the tube circuit?
So there's EQ in the circuitry, but it also changes the way the tube
like biasing and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't know the super detailed technicals of it, but it's, you're pushing the tube more to get more saturation. And so that's also being varied in these different settings as well.
Do we have to travel to Austria and climb to the top of, a high Alps mountain and find some mad wizard in a stone hut up there just like inventing microphones to get the answer to that?
I mean, that sounds wonderful to go to Austria and climb a mountain. But yeah, great. It's the headquarters is great. The people are very approachable there, the engineers. I was just there, a couple weeks ago.
Oh, cool. Wow.
And so cool to hang out with the engineers and designers and pick their brain about what they're doing. There's just some very brilliant people working there.
Not to put you on the spot, but what can you share a little bit? Is there a little bit of history to LEWITT microphones?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, Roman, who's the founder and CEO, he was originally working for AKG. And I think kind of through that experience of working for them, I think he had other ideas and ambitions of I feel like we could do more in the microphone space. I think there's more innovation to be done here, but there didn't seem to be room for it necessarily in, the company, the way it was operating. And, I know he had kind of a pivotal moment when he got in a pretty bad car accident. And then afterwards kind of decided, okay, now I need to actually act on these ideas I've had and form, a microphone company and actually do these things I'm thinking about. So LEWITT was sort of born out of that with this idea of not everything that has been done with microphone technology, not everything has been done yet. So there's more to do, more to innovate on, rather than just looking to the past and recreating traditional circuits. That there's some ways that we can solve problems for modern music creators. So
yeah, well, you guys are definitely doing some cool things and some innovative new ideas. Let's keep talking about the 1040 too, because that's obviously one of the very innovative mics that you guys make. So you've got these tube tones that you can add, then you've got the FET, but you also don't have to make those decisions while you're recording your vocals, right?
Yeah, so that is a really cool aspect as well. There's a dedicated FET circuit output on the power supply, and then there's a blend circuit or a blend output, which gives you whatever you set the dial between tube and FET, it gives you that mix. So if you wanted to get the tube circuit and the FET circuit on different tracks, you would turn it to 100% tube and then plug in both outputs, and then you could choose the mix of those two circuits later on. Another thing I've heard engineers talk about doing is using the FET circuit as like a parallel compression send, so they can split off the signal, send it to an 1176 and smash it.
Yeah.
While they're tracking, rather than doing that in the mix. And yeah, it's a cool, easy way to make that happen, which is a cool idea too. But yeah, it's kind of also a safety if you want to dial in something a little bit more character forward and unique, but have like a backup just in case later in the mix you decide it's not quite the right feel. That option's there.
Now, does the microphones we're on right now, the 640, also has this cool feature where it has a front and a back capsule that would normally be summed together to create the pickup patterns like, we're omni, now we're figure eight. But you can also do dual outputs of this mic and record both capsules at the same time, which is very cool. And I'm excited to do more experimenting with that in the studio. But does the 1040 also give you the multiple capsule thing like this one?
No, so that is unique to the 640 TS, is this And TS stands for twin system, which is kind of a reference to the dual output mode that you're talking about. So yeah, it basically gives you the front diaphragm and the back diaphragm on different tracks. So the way that can be really useful is, one cool thing is if you record in stereo with those two outputs, we have a plugin called Polarizer, and it has, a decoder so you can set it to any polar pattern you want after the fact. So, you could put this up as a drum room mic and, get the placement you like, and then later decide, I actually like it in figure 8 more than omni for this situation. And,
yeah, that's fascinating.
Make that call in the context of the mix rather than, on tracking day. So that can be useful, but honestly, I think there's a lot of other creative uses for it as like a sort of stereo recording solution.
Yeah.
You could put it, side facing to an acoustic guitar and have a nice stereo image from that. You could do that on drum overheads, on a drum room. One thing that's cool about that too is, so the regular dual output mode is 2 different cardioid patterns kind of back to back. So if you sum them to mono, it's an omni pattern. But if you pan them out, you get a stereo image. And if you flip the phase of one side, you get a figure 8 pattern that can also be panned. So, and I like that sound for like electric guitars. What I'll do is put the 640 on the speaker, right up to the grill, get that direct sound, and then I'll record in dual output mode and then flip the phase of the back capsule because I like the proximity effect you get with a figure 8 pattern. But then you can pan the direct sound and the ambient sound, the rear-facing capsule, to different sides and get a cool stereo image. So it's kind of like mixers often will like pan the reverb to one side to add some width to a mono guitar track. So it's like doing that, but it's actually, the ambience of the room that you're in, which is really cool.
Right. So you've got the one side is facing your voice or it's facing your guitar, the back side is facing the room. The back side gets flipped so that the mic is sort of acting like a figure 8. And that gives you a little bit of the proximity effect. Does that proximity effect change? This might be unfair to ask this, but does that change if you're treating that mic as a mono mic versus if you pan one to the left and one to the right? You still get that sort of figure 8 proximity you were talking about?
Yeah, I think it definitely changes depending on the panning and how things kind of sum together. But yeah, it's just a fun thing to be able to play with, and something that I stumbled across kind of by accident is, I was trying to mix the ambient side, the back-facing part of the microphone with the direct sound, and I was like, there's something I don't love about the mid-range, or it just sounds kind of boxy, and I was like, I'm just gonna flip the phase of the back and see what that does. And immediately I was like, oh, I love this sound. This is really cool.
That's cool. Yeah, it's fun to be able to experiment with stuff like that. What about the 1040? Talk about stuff that goes into creating vocals. And, like my question I had written down is like, what are some thoughts you have about layering vocals and harmonies? And then what sort of things need to happen at the mic? What sort of things happen in the editing, and what sort of things happen in the mixing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, my approach to vocals is, I'll typically get all my main vocals down, and, depending on the arrangement of the song, I'll have an idea of whether I want to do, like a lead vocal up the center and 2 doubles panned out left and right around the lead vocal, or if I want to do kind of more of the 2 vocals that are panned slightly left and right at equal volume and get that sound.
How would you describe the difference in those sounds?
I mean, you get a lot more with the latter. When they're equal volume, you get a lot more of that like chorusing effect, and the doubling is a lot more prominent. Whereas, the other way where you have a primary lead vocal and then the other one's panned hard left and right, it gives you this sense of width that can be very subtle. You could also turn it up and get, make it less subtle. But I think like because they're hard panned, it doesn't create quite the same texture as when you have 2 equal volume vocals panned a little bit off center.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good description. Sometimes I feel like this stuff it's that joke about like describing sounds is like dancing about architecture. It's like,
it's really
how
hard
do you do it, you know?
sometimes to, figure out, and you use all these visual metaphors that, maybe don't compute for everyone. But
no, but that's pretty clear. That difference between, two equal things, you get more of a chorusing sound because we're familiar with that versus the one voice up the middle, and then the doubles are sort of like tonal filler and widener.
Yeah, it feels more like a widening effect versus a chorusing effect.
Yeah.
Which, there's a subtle difference there because you have doubling plugins that do that. But yeah, it's definitely a different sound. I think if you want that very layered, obvious double sound, then doing sort of the equal volume, panning a little bit out to the sides can be a good option to go.
Adam Audio's S-Series, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors featuring 5 models from the compact S2V all the way up to the powerful S5H. The range builds on Adam Audio's iconic heritage with new technology for improved acoustic performance. With new woofers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine, the S-Series ensures accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail, and a forward-looking digital connectivity. Backed by a 5-year guarantee, Adam Audio monitors embody durability and professional sound for your studio at adamaudio.com. Let's back up a little bit. So I don't know how, I don't know whether you should reference specific songs or not, but I mean, you've got a lot of, your own vocals in your productions, other artists that you're working with too. So you've got a lot of examples of lush vocals that are built up.
Mm-hmm.
When do you decide that it's worth singing a left and a right double, where you end up with a triple vocal to get the result you want versus thinking, I'm just going to take my main vocal and use an effect that will create that effect for me? How do you balance those decisions yourself?
Yeah, well, I think if you're talking about like doubling plugins, I tend to not use those. If I have the option to have real doubles, I like how that sounds better. But it also is a genre thing. I think if it's more of a pop-leaning track, sometimes that artificial doubling sound can be exactly what the vocal needs and can be a really cool effect. But for a lot of my music, I want it to feel a little more organic. And so I'm always creating some amount of doubling so that I have that option to create width in the mix. And then it's just a matter of like how obvious I want that to be and sort of how thick I want the vocals to sound in the arrangement. I kind of swing back and forth. And ultimately, I feel like in a way, Eastern Souvenirs is kind of my playground to like play with production techniques and try stuff. And I'm not overly concerned about making everything 100% consistent. And I always want to do something new and kind of test something out. So I am changing techniques quite a bit.
Isn't it funny how that is so true? It's like when you do your own thing, you instantly, well, particularly in the creative stage, maybe as you get closer to the mixing and mastering, you can start to like be your own worst enemy. But in the creative stage, you get instant permission to try anything.
Yeah, totally.
And you just don't care and you try it and you either like it or you don't. You also know right away whether you like it or you don't. Totally. Which is, when you work with other people, sometimes you struggle with that. It's like, should I do this thing?
And you also have all the time in the world when you're doing your own stuff. Because, often what I run into recording other people is like, we book a vocal session and like, shoot, we barely have enough time to lay down like a harmony versus like all these vocal layers. So I think recording yourself is more conducive to doing all those vocal stacks and playing with all those things. Whereas, when you're on like a stricter timeline with a client, it can be harder to make that happen.
Okay, so here's a tough question for you. Making the vocal stacks, adding the extra bit, making the call, that was a good one, that was a bad one, do it again. How is that different for you when you're cutting your own vocals and you're making all those judgment calls, I assume in headphones, versus when an artist is doing it and you're making all those decisions in speakers in the room as a producer engineer.
Yeah.
Is that how it works for you, or are you in headphones in both situations? And what have you learned about the difference in making good calls on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with my own vocals, what my approach has been is I typically try to limit myself to, 5 or maybe 6 passes on any vocal part. Just because I've found that when I start to go deeper than that, I start to lose perspective of what I'm even like going for and what sounds better versus what sounds different. And then I think while I'm recording, instead of necessarily paying attention to what sounds the best, it's kind of like what feels the best, And if I feel like, oh, wow, that performance felt really good, I'll make note of like, okay, take 3, listen back to that. I think that's the one. And I'll take those notes as I'm recording.
Even for a harmony, like a double part, or is that more for the lead?
That's more for the lead, I would say. And then when I'm doubling, it's definitely like I'll listen back. How consistent is it? Is there a timing issue? How much is it chorusing because of pitch inconsistencies? And then I'll do it again as needed. So it is a little bit more like time consuming with the layering because I am listening back to see how everything gels. Whereas like when I'm getting takes for a main vocal, it's more about feel and like that impression in the moment. And then I do go back and comp it, as soon as I can after the performance while it's still fresh in my mind of sort of what felt good. And then, I try not to get too choppy and every other word is a different take. I try to keep as much of one take as I can.
Even on the harmonies and stuff like that too?
Yeah, on the harmonies too. I mean, that's the ideal just because otherwise it's very time consuming. But if I need to, I mean, I'll chop up background vocals more readily because if it sounds good blended in, then it doesn't matter if it sounds a little bit chopped together on its own. Yeah,
I'm always struck by, some of the crazy stuff you can get away with and doubles and places like that because you're just, like if there's something that's flamming, it's always like the S's and the T's and stuff like that. And do you
totally
try and train yourself to leave those out with your voice when you're actually recording the doubles and the harmonies?
I try to be softer on them. I don't ever like just completely leave them out. I might edit them later just to kind of like line up S's. Like it's particularly like at the very end of words and the S is almost kind of separate from the other part of the waveform and it's really easy to line those up. But I try to like be as close as I can with consonants and making sure everything locks in there, as I'm editing. And I mean, I'd say, doing all this for myself is very similar with someone else. I would say when I'm recording other people, we're doing a lot more listening back and I want their impression of, what feels best. And, I'll offer, my opinion as well. But the first thing I want to know is like what felt the best to you.
Yeah. And then what about when you're recording yourself? What does your setup look like? I mean, sometimes I'm more often putting stuff in during a tracking session, and so I go out to where the vocal mic was and just take a laptop and like kind of punch in that way. Do you find yourself like where you've got your vocal mic set up basically at your mix position and you're cutting all your vocals right there in the same place you would do your editing and your mixing?
I like to sing standing up, so I'll set up a mic stand kind of nearby, my mixing desk. Maybe throw up some other, blankets on mic stands for a little bit more deadening, since I don't have the most acoustic treatment in my room. And then, I'm basically just kind of like hitting R on the keyboard and scooting over to the microphone nearby and cutting vocals right there when I'm doing it myself. I kind of wish I had, an iPad so I could just do the remote thing, and eventually I'll probably get that. That'd be a little easier. But I'm basically, trying to find, the pocket in my room that is both convenient where another big thing is because I record with compression. I have a little like golden age comp 2A, which is similar to kind of an LA2A idea. And so I have that. It's like a little modified compressor that I use for tracking. So I need to have like a sight line to that too when I'm dialing everything in. And
Right, because you got to see the needle.
exactly.
It's such a pain in the ass sometimes setting up our own sounds where you're like, I have to be on the mic. I also have to be reaching over to this mic pre. I also have to see the needle over there. I also have to see the level in Pro Tools,
Yeah, so that definitely is a consideration of like, can I easily see all of these things, like the different meters and, reach everything. So yeah, it's kind of a funny juggling act when you're recording yourself.
Yeah. Do you ever notice the difference between engineering, producing for somebody else when you feel like the answer is in the knobs? Like the answer to this sound is in the knobs. I got to adjust the knobs, right? Versus when you go out there yourself and you're like, no, the answer is in how I'm going to deliver this out of my voice right now because I hear it immediately in the headphones, kind of thing. You know what I'm getting at? Again, it's that difference between doing it yourself versus engineering somebody else doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but I do think like, yeah, I really enjoy recording other people when I can just be focused on the technical side. And I also really enjoy singing when I'm not in charge of setting levels and adjusting the, peak reduction and all that stuff.
I never get to do that. You get to sing with somebody else engineering?
I mean, very not typically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have in the past worked with, other engineers and done that. And it's been a great experience, but yeah, it's a rare experience for me for sure. But yeah, I like not having to juggle all those things at once because it is a very different mindset, being fully in performance mode and not being distracted by, VU meters and the levels in your DAW and all that stuff. And I like being able to provide that service to artists where they can just focus on their performance and I can make sure everything's sounding good. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun to have those separated rather than always doing it yourself.
Do you ever get into that flow when the artist is doing a double and you're like, all right, I'm going to play you the next word or phrase or line and you're just going to hear it. And like, I won't even speak to you. I'll just play it. And then on the next pass, we're in record, where you know what I mean? Where you're trying to like move really quickly. I feel like my brain can hold on to an idea and that's, about it. Like I can listen, I can hear what that vocal phrase was and I'm trying to remember it so that I can sing it again. And I feel like it's the same way for the other singer that I'm working with. And it's like, I don't even want to talk on the talkback because it's going to interrupt both of us kind of thing,
Totally. Yeah. Or one thing that I've had to do, is trying to nail down a harmony. Sometimes the easiest thing is to take their melody, quickly turn on Melodyne, edit it into the harmony that you want them to sing, and just have them listen to that over and over, and then immediately jump into recording it. Because it can be really hard to retain that weird harmony melody in your head for some singers. So I found that to be a helpful thing to kind of, just kind of literally put the loop on and play it back, a few times and then have them immediately go into tracking that part.
Yeah, especially when the first note of the harmony, like sometimes you're coming out of a verse into a chorus or a bridge, and that first note that the harmony needs to hit doesn't actually make sense until the downbeat of that chorus, And so it can be tricky to hold on to that note in a singer's head. And I think a good reminder for us too, as engineers and producers is like, be nice. It's like, it's hard to do this stuff. It's hard to hold on to a note. It's hard to be out there at the mic in brain meltdown mode and get the part right. And we can all, under the pressure of a difficult session, we can all look and sound like idiots. You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah. No, it is hard. It is very challenging to be, in that position. And I think that interaction is really important of like the feedback that you're giving through the talk back to whoever you're recording and the encouragement you're giving them along with whatever notes or coaching they might need in that moment. And, a lot of times I think at least, with some vocalists I work with, they're so hard on themselves too. And they totally understand kind of what needs to be improved. So it's more of just being an encouragement and kind of helping them feel confident in what they're doing.
Yeah, rather than like being in the control and be like, dude, how can you not remember how to sing Happy Birthday? Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
I am massively impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The mastering assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need for a professional result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval and get comments back like, holy bleep, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, you're a wizard, finally I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge, well then I know I'm doing something right. So check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great apps at iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music we are creating to the style that we want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments' complete bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and then adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's a great way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show, aka I'm sitting here right with Brian Fisher in Recording Studio Rockstars HQ. I need a name for this podcast, for a studio. What should it be called, man?
Oh man, I'm terrible at coming up with names on the spot, but it's cozy
you came
in
up
here.
With Eastern Souvenirs.
That's true. That's true.
You ready to jam?
I'm ready.
All right, let's just jump right into drums, man. We all love drums. Undertow, treading water. Holy shit, drum sounds. Talk to us about how you even got that stuff. I was almost hesitant to write the questions down because at a certain point, I'm like, these sound so good. I'm afraid his answer is going to be that it was all programmed or something. and if it was, that's fine too. But how do you like to record drums, and how did you get some of those drum sounds?
Yeah, so I would love to talk about that because that's been a really fun thing for me because, in the past, I was just programming drums exclusively. And on my most recent release, I was like, I want to record real drums. I want to do this kind of surf rock, psych rock thing and do it, pretty traditional. There's some, kind of Farfisa combo organ stuff. There's bass, guitars, and then drums. Real Farfisa,
or do you go into the computer and find the cool things?
The Arturia VST that from their analog suite of instruments. It sounds really great, like really, really good. But yeah, I wish I had a real Farfisa organ because I love that sound. It's just I always come back to that, and then like Wurlitzers and Rhodes. But anyway,
we'll talk more synths here
drums.
in a little bit too. Drums. It's time for drums.
So the way that was approached, so I wrote the songs with some basic drum loops as placeholders, and then I removed those and took the demos to my friend Hector St. Hilaire. So he is a professional drummer, Berkeley grad. He's a very versatile drummer too. So he can do any style you want, and he just can immediately pick it up and run with it. So it's so great to work with him. He has a home studio that's a pretty small room, but he has a pretty kind of well-treated corner of that room where he does drum tracking. So there's not much of a room sound to the place, but it's great for getting good dead drum sounds. And
I mean, they didn't even strike me as dead. They just strike me as awesome, on those tracks. And there is a variety of drums on your productions too. I mean, I've got other questions about some of the other styles, which maybe you would call like that psych rock thing.
Yeah.
But like, what do you remember about the recording of those drums? And unless that's an unfair question to ask, maybe he just sent them to you and you're like, that's it.
So I wanted to be, part of it from start to finish. And so we literally went through and he pulled out, different kick drums, different toms, different snares. And we, listened to them in the room. And I was like, yes, no. And like, I don't have a ton of experience, doing this. So it was really fun for me to kind of just jump in and just kind of, go full on and just try and take what I was hearing in my head and make it happen. And he had, all the kind of equipment for that. And I brought some extra microphones over and, we set it up. We used the DTP 640 Rex LEWITT kick drum mic, which has 2 capsules, 1 condenser, 1 dynamic. And so that gives you like all that kind of beater punch, but also like a ton of sub-frequency information.
But those kicks are great, man.
Yeah.
So if that mic did the trick,
that was
the mic.
I think I like snuck in a bit of a sample just for a little more attack, but because I found in his room with his kick drum, it was hard to get quite enough attack. No matter what mic you use.
Where did you decide to put the Rex, the 640 Rex?
So he had a little porthole in the drum. Okay. So it was literally like just inside that. So having that kind of limited some of the placement options.
And that answers first part of the question was front head on or front head off on a kick. So you left it on.
Yeah. So front head on, there's, a pillow inside to dampen a bit. And just inside the little hole cut out there. And then used a SM7B on snare top, which definitely helped give that really beefy snare sound, which I liked a lot. I used a pair of LEWITT LCT1040s for overheads, kind of in an XY formation. And then I had my sort of modified MXL 990 as like a mono overhead additionally. And then what else did we do? The Electro Voice EV635A as kind of a right knee mic.
That's the Omni dynamic, right? The sort of the Beatlesy.
It's a little tiny Omni mic, super cool looking. Placed that kind of right over top of the kick drum pointed at the side of the snare. And I ran that actually through an Audioscape 76D compressor that I actually brought with me specifically to smash that mic in particular. So that was the only compression we did while tracking was just on the right knee mic, sending it through the 76.
Cool. And there's something to be said for, compressing during the recording versus saving it for later. I mean, there are things you can accomplish by compressing later in the mix, but you also can't possibly know whether you've got the sound or not until you hear that compression on it.
Totally.
For some sounds.
And I knew I wanted that mic obviously to be, a great character mic with sort of a gnarly mid-rangey sound to it. So that was definitely kind of the key. I think the preamp on that too, I had the Warm Audio WA12, just like their API kind of 312 inspired preamp, and kind of driving that pretty hard too, because you have the output trim.
What did you say was your snare mic?
The SM7B. So yeah, I've enjoyed using that. We used the big fat snare drum for dampening, because I really wanted that kind of super thick snare sound.
What's the big fat snare drum for dampening? What is
so that? That's a company. They make a bunch of accessories for drums. They're like little kind of cutout plastic and foam rings that you can put on toms or snare drums. And they're like just the perfect solution for kind of dampening the ring of a snare and giving you that kind of shorter, tighter, thicker snare sound or tom drum sound. So instead of using like a bunch of, gaff tape and tea towels to deaden drums like like Ringo did back in the day, or like, other, dampening stuff, it's just an easy thing you can just throw onto a drum and it sounds awesome.
So is that essentially, it's kind of like an O-ring, but O-rings, like when I started, O-rings were always just like an old used drum head where you just cut the center out and throw it on there too.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's cool to hear. I need to go check those out. And it's fun to have all those accessories. One of the challenges I find with the drum accessories is, where do they go when you're not accessorizing? Studios are so hard to keep track of stuff and keep them organized. And it's like, you kind of have to have like a little safe zone, or else that O-ring is like, somebody stepped on it and crunched it in between sessions, and it's lost in the bottom of a closet.
Yeah, no, it's sweet. So I actually got to meet the owner of that company. I sold an interface, and he bought it, and we met to exchange, give him the interface, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I own this company," and he gave me like a whole bunch of their their drum tortilla and big fat snare drum and a bunch of their stuff. So that was super generous of them.
So drum tortilla, I've heard of that one. That's the same company.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm gonna get more of this stuff because I love treating drums. It's funny, and it's cool to hear you talk about it, because it is one of the things you discover in your recording journey is you're like, oh, it's really important to get the sound to begin with and then record it. Like
That's
whether it's
so
drums
true.
or guitars or whatever, right?
Yeah, especially, I found especially with, snare drum in particular, and like dampening, sometimes I'll get stuff to mix that, they're like, I want this really tight, dead drum sound. And you listen to the raw tracks and you're like, oh, shoot, well, you didn't record that way at all. So this is going to be not quite what you think, know.
And just for the record, I know you feel more strongly than that, and we are allowed to swear on this podcast, but you can keep it. You can keep it clean if you want to. But I know that deep down inside, you feel like much stronger language about that comment. Yeah, no, it's true, man. And so okay, let's pivot back to that for a sec, because one of the things you put in your bio description too is doing remote mixing. So if you're doing a lot of mixing, talk a little bit about some of those things. What are some of the typical experiences with that? I mean, people deliver you tracks. That's what you get to work with. You can't go change that sound now. You can't go out to the drums and adjust it. You can't have the guitar player play a different part,
Yeah. Yeah, it's always interesting, I think, like, learning when you hear the rough mix, being able to listen to it and hear, all right, can I work with this audio? How much potential is there in this before accepting the project? And you still don't fully know what you're dealing with until you get the multi-track and listen to things, and you're like, oh, okay, here's what I'm up against.
Right, because it usually starts out with just a rough mix of the song. Or something.
Yeah, and you're like, you don't know how much is baked into the recording versus, some weird mixing stuff that was added later. And then you get it, and you do the best you can with it. And I think drums tend to be, a challenging part of it, but also a very fun part of it. You can do a lot to transform drums, especially when you have, augmenting with samples and, so many different creative tools.
Talk about some of the tools that you use to augment drums with samples. I mean, do you have some go-tos that you're always using, or do you have like 10 different ones and you might use any one of them? Are you actually placing samples on a track in Pro Tools by hand?
So I used Logic primarily. So
Okay, cool,
I'm
cool.
kind of mainly mixing in Logic. But yeah, so I can talk recently about, an artist that I've mixed a couple albums for now. It's called Dark Soft. Really cool band based out of Portland, Maine, but originally from Seattle, which is also where I'm from. And actually, I didn't meet him till we both were on the East Coast, even though we kind of were in Seattle at the same time and knew a lot of the same people. So kind of funny circumstance there. But anyways, so working with like his drums, the approach that I would take is they came in fairly raw sounding and needing refinement. So one thing that I like to do is, throw on a channel strip EQ like the Neve 1073 from UAD, and I'll put that on every drum track and start playing around with the EQ and, mainly on kick and snare, everything a little bit, and just kind of basically doing the kind of moves that I might do during tracking if I had,
right,
that EQ on
just
every channel.
Sculpting it a little bit. And then, back when they didn't have native versions of the plugins, I would print everything and just, that would be kind of a new redo of like the front end of those drums. But now, they have the native ones, so I can just kind of leave it and don't have to bounce everything down necessarily. But I won't really like think of that the same way as like, more in-depth EQ sculpting. And then when it comes to actually getting into more of the mixing and sculpting, I really love using the Neutron EQ. You can just turn on the dynamic EQ whenever you need. And I've used those tools a lot. I used to work at Isotope, so I think it's more like familiarity with those tools. And I really love their transient shaper as well. So that's definitely a helpful thing. And so, yeah, with Darksoft on that record, I think the challenge was he wanted this sort of very like tight and kind of a dead drum sound, but the drums weren't really recorded that way. So I triggered samples off of the kick and snare to kind of augment those sounds a little bit. But I also did I did some transient shaping, kind of reducing the sustain of the snare, adding, a little bit more attack, doing a parallel compression track and adding a gate to kind of give it this sense of kind of punch and get rid of some of that room sound. So that was kind of a trick that really helped actually with that drum sound and kind of helped kind of create it. Was I used like a devil lock, which, notoriously kind of blows up the sound and makes it sound super roomy. But I love like the kind of crunch it adds. And so I did that. And then I added an Isotope gate to it with like a 4:1 ratio. And I played around with the parameters to kind of give it almost this kind of like, so it wasn't super choppy because you can adjust the attack and release. And it's more of an expander than like a, hard gate. And you can kind of play around with it until it sounds natural, but still like super punchy and tight. And then blend that in with the original sound. And it helps you to get a ton of that character, but also keep everything sounding really tight. Yeah. Do you think that's one of the keys to doing what you're describing is making moves to stuff, but blending it again against the real drums? It's like the sweet spot is often, the real drum plus this thing as opposed to just replacing it.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say, even on those records, the samples were, maybe only 30% of the sound versus the original drum, or like the blend, kind of 30-70. So I try to favor the real tracks as much as possible and make those sound as good as I can. And then if you just need, I think a lot of times it's like, I need a little bit more attack in the mid-range on the kick drum, or I need, maybe it's a little bit more like thump in the low end. And then with the snare, it's usually always like, I need a little bit more brightness out of it without making the hi-hat sound awful.
Right, exactly.
So,
where are some places? Well, this is a loaded question. So, you've referenced attack, and you've referenced mid-range, and low-end thump. But have you discovered that there are danger zones to combining real drums and samples? Like, for example, can you get away with adding samples that are duplicating low end and subs that are also in the drum track? Like, do you have to kind of choose one or the other? In other words, low frequencies can start to phase cancel against each other, right?
Yeah.
When you're layering stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. It's definitely tricky, especially with kick drum in that regard. And so it's usually like the very beginning, I'll be adding the kick sample and finding something that sounds good, and it'll inherently transform the way the low end feels on the kick drum. And you just have to like find what feels right. And then I'll mix from there, and I'll mix the sample and the original kick together like they're just one track. So I don't really do individual processing to them, because like how they sound together is the sound that I'm working from at that point.
Yeah. What about trigger? Is that a plugin you use, the Slate trigger?
Yeah. So I was using just the drum doubling function in Logic for a long time.
That's a built-in Logic function?
Yeah, they have.
I'm always just amazed at what Logic just has, all these secret
Totally,
worlds.
Yeah. And I mean, oftentimes they're great. In this case, it's, for me, I don't love it. And so I ended up getting Trigger, Stephen Slate Trigger too, because I was just running into so many issues with things not quite lining up properly, and even like weird velocity issues, because it generates a MIDI track. And
right.
Like I ran into this weird thing where it was like, I made the velocity the same on all the kick samples, but it was still like every other one was louder for some reason. And I couldn't figure it out. And that was the point where I just literally went and bought Trigger, and I was like, I'm done with you, Logic.
Yeah, we got records to make.
Exactly.
All right, so I got other questions about Darksoft, and this question also applies to Eastern Souvenirs Sleepwalking. So Darksoft, Only Time Will Tell, Eastern Souvenirs Sleepwalking, both these are in the playlist. They both do a big breakdown in the middle of the song, where the song comes and all of a sudden it's just like this breakdown in the center of the song. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you wanted to just talk about how important, the importance of arrangement in a production, and how that translates to a mix too. Why do we even do breakdowns in songs? What's the point of a breakdown?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the case of Darksoft, that was, Bill, who's the kind of central character of Darksoft. He is Darksoft. He had the arrangements pretty dialed in, and anything I was doing was more from a mixing perspective, just enhancing the arrangement that was already there. But I would say in my own tracks, like, you gotta constantly be adjusting the energy and bringing things up and bringing things down. Otherwise, nothing feels exciting or big if there's no contrast to it. So trying to figure out ways to create contrast and always adding and removing elements in every section so that you're not duplicating. It's like the last thing I want is for something to feel copy pasted. And it's easy to do that now because, you have all these virtual instruments and you can literally just copy paste your arrangement together from MIDI tracks.
Right. Yeah. Not even the final print, just the MIDI notes themselves could be copy pasted, right?
Yeah. And so you got to add that human variation and make things interesting and exciting. And something I'm constantly trying to improve in my own music. And I think I need to write more bridges for that reason.
Yeah, bridges. Oh, the middle eight. Yes. I love bridges. Just go to the relative minor, rock stars. Start there. Try that first. See how far it gets you. The S Series by Atom Audio, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors, blending advanced engineering and in-house design. With 5 models in various sizes and configurations, these monitors build on Atom Audio's iconic heritage while incorporating new technology for improved acoustic performance. The range includes the compact S2V with the 7-inch woofer, the 3-way S3H with twin 7-inch woofers, the vertical S3V with a single 9-inch woofer, and the powerful S5H and S5V main monitors featuring a 12-inch woofer and exceeding 131 dBSPL per pair. Despite differences in size and power, all these models provide highly analytical sound for professional audio applications. The S-Series includes new woofers, mid-range drivers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine for crossover optimization. The result is accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail in bass and mid-frequencies with wider frequency ranges, and forward-looking digital connectivity, all in a durable design. The S-Series ensures longevity in your studio, backed with a 5-year guarantee at adamaudio.com. The importance of arrangement. I remember somebody suggesting to me that like, oh, this song just kind of, sometimes we do a song, we get into it, and like we get as far as the intro and the first verse and the chorus, and now we're just kind of stuck in the song. It can feel that way sometimes. And learning to take things away again.
Yeah.
Like you learn that if a song is sort of like repetitive, you always have the option to just stop it and then start it again. And all of a sudden it's fresh again in that moment. You know, it's like, just think about like dance music, the whole like, you know, the whole, what do they call it? Yeah. The sweep up before the drop, you know. That's what makes everybody want to dance again, is because you stopped it and you started it again. And it's good to remember that everywhere. It's like bass notes. It's like a bass note is powerful if a moment before it, there was nothing.
Exactly. And I think that's something that I do try to bring to, you know, mixes with, you know, when I'm given the creative license to do so. I find more and more like people are like, hey, can you mix this? And feel free. Like, if you think it needs something, if you think something needs to be removed, like I want you to take creative license. And yeah, in that case, you know, there might be a section where things feel like, oh, it needs to be much smaller here. And I'll just delete the bass during that section. And I'll like delete a few of the guitar tracks. And I'll be like, this is how it should feel, you know, like, and so I am making some arrangement calls in those cases too, where, yeah, you just need to carve more away. I think some people, you know, especially when they're handing it over to a mixing, they'll record a billion tracks, you know, and give it to you. And then you have to figure out how to sort through it.
You're like, hey, thanks.
I know. And I mean, that can be a fun challenge. Like with Darksoft, he records layers and layers of guitars. So there'll be like a rhythm part and he'll layer it 4 times. And then a lead part, he'll layer it 4 times, surf guitar 4 times. So like, pretty soon you have like 36 guitar tracks. And I mean, most of the time I'm throwing out half of them and only using pairs and trying to pare it down. Because yeah, it's duplicates of the same performance, right? So, but at the same time, he's given me that creative license to do that. And he wants that. He wants to give me as much to work with as I can. And I think at this point, it's not a burden because I know what to expect in the way that he records. And sometimes it can actually be cool to have those extra tracks, like on vocals with his recent record I mixed. I took 2 extra tracks and I would run them through like a rotor cabinet plugin and layer those in, because sometimes trying to do that in parallel just sounded too funky, you know? So having separate vocal performances you can use as a parallel effect can be a cool thing.
Do you have an actual rotor cabinet or do you use a plugin for that?
Just a plugin for that. So, yeah, I think literally just like the Logic. Logic has a rotor cabinet plugin, but I don't even use that. I use they have a guitar amp pedal board plugin that has pedal plugins within it, and one of them is a rotor cabinet guitar pedal. Right. And I use that because it has a different sound that just sounds better to me. Yeah, it's kind of.
Does Logic
random.
let you group and categorize plugins according to your own organization? Because I think about that issue in Pro Tools too. So, for example, we have all these options like EQs, compressors, distortions, reverbs, you know, funny things that are channel strips, things with funny names. But really the way we think about it when we're working is like, I want the spinny sound.
Yeah.
Right now. And it's like you'd like to have just a folder with 5 spinny sounds in it, and you could just go listen to it, for the rotor cabinet. Does Logic let you organize that way, or do you just sort of keep track in your head?
I'm sure they do. Like, and all of their stock plugins are categorized really well. So you have like all the EQs, compressors, or like I think it's like dynamics, which includes compressors and gates and limiters. And then you have modulation. So everything's organized really well. But when you get to the third-party stuff, it's just, you find the
audio unit folder and
find the
like,
manufacturer,
oh right.
Find the plugin. And at that point, it's usually like, if I'm going to third-party plugins, it's very intentional and I know what I'm reaching for in that case. So,
do you use a lot of stock plugins while you're mixing or producing? You find that that's a go-to?
I have used a lot of stock plugins, but I think more and more I've definitely adopted. I have all the Sound Toys stuff and use that all the time. I have a lot of UAD stuff, a lot of Isotope stuff. So I tend to use a lot of that. But I mean, I'm still using the Logic channel EQ all the time. And sometimes, the Logic compressor or limiter.
Logic compressor is awesome.
When you just need something that's, simple and just, it's not crucial that it has this specific character to it. Yeah. I'll always reach for stock stuff because it's like, it's less CPU intensive usually. And yeah.
Well, what I love about the Logic compressor is you open the compressor and then there's like 6 compressor options at a one button away. And so you can instantly just go dit, 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 like that one. Let's go with that. Without even thinking about what kind of compressor it is,
Yeah.
And I wish more plugin experience was that way. I wish that you could have, a 6 button, a 10 button, A/B thing for 10 third-party plugins, all different, and just kind of quickly go like, ooh, that tone right there. Because that's the way it feels good making, if you're playing the guitar, you just play one of 10 notes until you're like, I like that note. Moving on,
Yeah, to kind of easily swap stuff out. Yeah, I found the compressor setting in Logic that I love and come back to is, I think it's their VCA based on the DBX 160. It just has such a cool, like, punchy sound to it. I'll still use that all the time for, drums on snare or kick.
All right, so speaking of more drums, Heboo or Hebao Arc.
Eboo, yeah.
Eboo Arc, okay. Reminds me of Cornelius' New Music Machine. I don't know if you ever listened to Cornelius.
I'm not familiar, no.
Cool stuff. I'm going back to like 90s, I think, at this point. Maybe 2000s. But the crazy kind of splashing drums.
Yeah.
You used the word psych rock before. I'm not sure if that's it, but there's something about sort of psychedelic and surf, and it's like it's managed chaos in music. And so how do you get that kind of chaotic drum sound? And then talk about the importance of managing cymbals in drums and finding the balance between the right amount of chaos versus a little too much, and all of a sudden we're just,
totally.
We're pulling ourselves away from the music or whatever.
Yeah, that was a really fun EP to work on. So Eboo, he's an artist that is originally from Seattle, where I'm from. So I knew him from the local scene there. But he now lives in Paris. And he's been based out there for a few years now. And yeah, it's kind of like dream pop, very like strong 80s influence in there for sure. And he has like Peter, who is Eboo, essentially. He has a great ear when it comes to different sounds and production, and the audio he provides me sounds great. So with that EP in particular, there was a lot of, he would provide drum samples, like more like drum machine sounds or like very like 80s inspired drum samples. And then there was also an acoustic kit. So the trick was kind of blending those. So I had to kind of edit the drums, as 100% to the grid as I possibly could so that they lined up properly with the program drums.
100% to grid or 100% to the program drum?
To the grid, which was the program drums
Also
were
where
like
the
right on
program
there.
drums were,
Yeah,
right.
because they were like MIDI, snapped to the grid. So, and yeah, it blended better than I thought. I was, a little bit unsure, but I think what helped kind of glue the sounds together too is like the snare, for example, I sent to a gated like reverb and sent both the sample and the real snare to that reverb, and that reverb send helped glue those sounds together. And similar with like the kick, I would send to kind of a really short kick room ambience and send both like the sample and the real kick to that. Um, and so I tried to do that as much as possible to kind of put them in the same ambient space together.
Well, it has a quality too of when the cymbals are going like that, in contrast to Treading Water and Undertow, two of your productions. Treading Water, for example, starts out and it's like the guitars and drums are it's simple and it's very punchy, and you can turn your stereo like way up, because it's so in and out. And then in contrast to that, Ibu is more of this, it's like I said, the cymbals are going a lot and stuff like that. And it ends up with this quality where it's like part of why you feel the kick or the snare in that moment is because you hear the whole drum set just ducking down. It's like the compression does this cool thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was the parallel compression on that. And that was something I tried to manage it to some level because I think, we were kind of going back and forth about like, how much should it pump? I like a little bit because it gives this sense of like energy and like this pulse to the song when you have. So I like to send a little bit of the overheads to the parallel bus. And I probably, don't mind as much pumping as like, he was like, can we back that off a little bit? And so that was kind of carefully managed to get it to a place where it felt right. And for me, I think I tend to lean into drum sounds that are not classically right and have kind of gnarly distortion and compression artifacts that I think are just cool sounding. So I know, some people might be like, well, he sent, too much cymbals to that and the pumping and blah, blah, blah. That's not how you're supposed to do it. But, I'm like, well, I love that sound.
Yeah, I think it's
awesome.
Are you a John Bryan fan at all?
I'm not familiar,
John?
actually.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just listening. My daughter was playing some old Fiona Apple records, which I think she did a bunch of that stuff with John Bryan. And I think you dig the sounds. It's like, it's compression becomes part of the drum sound. Like it doesn't work without compression on a totally different style of music. Portishead would be a good example. That kind of programming where it's like the kick makes the cymbal go.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like, unless you have that combination of everything, you don't even have the sound yet. EDM's a lot like that, I've learned. I've learned a lot about the EDM programming might be very straight, but it's the parallel compressions that give it the whole vibe and the whole, the rhythmic quality and everything.
Yeah, I love messing with that. Like it's fun to duck reverbs to the kick, like on like an arpeggiated synth part, like the reverb send will be ducking to the kick and it adds this just, weird atmosphere to it. And I think it all serves to make the kick drum feel bigger, like the kick drum is sort of, affecting the whole song because it's so powerful, in my mind.
Yeah. And then also when we just think about making music that just fills up the speakers, if you're at the top, where can you go from there? Well, you can go back down to the bottom again. So it's like, to me, that's what parallel compressions give you, is they give you a way to send everybody back down to the ground floor so you can come back up to the full speaker level again.
Yeah. So speaking of drum chaos with Ibu, one fun thing that we did on Upon the Clouds You Weep, which is kind of a more shoegazy heavy track, there was kind of a breakdown section of that. And I mixed the song, I sent it to him, and he was like, hey, so I had the drummer record just some random drum fills and chaotic parts that I want to layer here just because like I want it to feel more chaotic and wild during this section. And so I was like, Interesting. Okay. How do I piece together these random, not in time drum fills and random parts like layered into the drums that are already there?
So they weren't even played to that part of the song yet. They were just more like
he was just sort of
samples you could throw
improvising on the drums and like doing weird fills.
Okay.
And I like put it on the grid and tried to line it up here and there and basically cut out sections and quantize sections so that it would start off the grid and then it would kind of like resolve to the beat a little bit. So there was some kind of organization to it. And then another thing I did is just kind of like high pass and low pass it, send it to a bunch of distortion so that it felt a little bit more distant and sort of behind the actual drums that were driving the song.
Yeah.
In that section. And it was an interesting balancing act because, yeah, it's like, how do you make this sound chaotic but not like a mistake? Like just something that doesn't sound like, wow, what did they do to the song there? Like.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's fun to do that stuff. And I guess, when you're in that creative space, you just sort of do things quick. I sometimes find that it's better to do a bunch of things, not try and judge it too much in the moment. Just do it and move on to the next one and then come back through and like look at it again. Like, okay, I really like that one, and that one, the rest of them, goodbye, or
Yeah,
whatever.
Totally. I mean, that's how I approach, a lot of songwriting and arranging is, create the demo as fast as possible. A lot of times I'm using my iPhone to record an acoustic guitar part and then just like roughly lining it up on the grid and copy and pasting drum loops and just assembling something, throwing everything at the wall. And then I'm really going in and refining and like, okay, that's too much. Cut this away, cut that away. And then, from there, I can like build that arrangement. Once you throw everything at the wall and then start carving away the stuff that's a little bit too much, and you pare down the intro that's like, way too many bars long.
Yeah, another EDM analogy would be maybe viewing production as you layer everything up so you've got your maxed out moment, and then to arrange the song, you just simply remove everything and build it back up so many bars at a time. And sometimes with rock production, it can be that way too, or even if it's just mentally within the arrangement,
Yeah, you find that moment that just feels good and like, this is like the vibe of the song. This is the thing that is going to make people come back and listen to it again. And then, yeah, from there, you have to like build a story around it to like figure out how do you get to that moment and create anticipation for it and, all of that.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. All right, so let's go to, let's stay on the finger-picking guitar bit here for a minute because we haven't really talked about that. What are some, you got a lot of that in your discography on your own stuff with other artists, Eleanor Pearl, Return to Rest, Eclo. How do I pronounce that one too?
Yeah, it's French. It's like Eclo,
Eclo.
which means echo, I think.
Oh, okay, cool. French. You got clean fingerpick guitar and vocals and stuff like that. What's some good ways to record fingerpicked acoustic guitar? Do you have any favorite mics for that too? Have you sort of learned some cool things about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So with I've done a lot with nylon string, which is a very different approach than steel string. Because yeah, I find a lot with nylon string guitar, finger picked, it's very dark. And so if you're trying to fit it into a dense arrangement, you really need to get the brightness and articulation from it. And so I'll lean into brighter mics for that. One that, I love is just, you take the 540S from LEWITT and right at the 12th fret. And it's just great kind of bright sound to it that really cuts through the mix and also sounds natural. Another thing that I played around with is kind of adding an SM57 to a large diaphragm condenser as well, putting them right next to each other and mixing those together. And it
compress the shit out of that SM57, right?
Yeah, it just gives you this interesting kind of mid-range like character that can help it stand out and feel a little more solid in the mix. Otherwise, it can kind of disappear behind everything else.
Yeah. Here's a fun one to try if you can get a hold of it. We used to do this back when micro cassette recorders, these little voice memo things, which had the built-in crunchy mic with all the limiting and compression.
Mm-hmm.
Back when those were common, we used to take one and then you just wire up the little headphone jack and put it in record mode and set it up near your other mic. And then you'd run that into like whatever, a DI or something. You'd just get into a mic pre somehow. And it does this really great, crunchy, compressed acoustic thing.
Yeah.
You can layer that in with your other mics.
That's awesome.
Really fun.
One thing I've actually done too is record it on my iPhone and just use that. Cause like, what song is it? A song called Walk With Me that I produced. The acoustic guitar track in that is recorded with my iPhone. I just put some headphones on, listened to the track, recorded it to my phone in voice memos, and added. And there's just this weird compression and EQ that they do that in a mix like that, it just really works. I think I also wanted to make it more lo-fi, so I put retro color RC20 on it and kind of mangled it a little bit. But yeah, at that point, it's like it almost doesn't matter what you record with it when you're going to mangle it into something else. But yeah, iPhones can be a cool tool when you want something a little bit weird and compressed. And
I'm glad to hear you say that because I was exploring that. I was thinking about that too, and how, when we had cassette recorder things, it made sense you could include it. It was also in phase in real time when you did it. But now that we're in this digital world, you still have these cool tools like iPhones, but you can't do it in real time, but you can like record it in the voice memo, get that thing, layer it back in. Another trick that I did recently was taking the iPhone and I played something back out of the speaker in the control room and I just re-recorded it that way with the voice memo.
Oh, interesting.
And then flew it back in and like, pan that to the other side or something and get like a interesting kind of doubling effect. You move the phone around, now you've got your own like manual Leslie,
Oh yeah. No, that's super fun. I have an old cassette deck that I got, for $30 from, place that has a mic input on the front, and it has a line input in the back, and so you can record to cassette tape, and it's super fun for that, running things through it, and then you have to kind of time stretch them to line it up with the original material, but then you get this cool like flanging effect, because it's not perfectly lined up, and you have to do some time stretching to actually get it to match.
Yeah, which makes it cool sometimes if you do it the right way,
Exactly.
And if you don't like it, don't use it,
Yeah, totally. It's fun to play around with that stuff. And acoustic guitar can be really fun, especially when you're going for something that's less natural sounding and you're going for just something that's a little bit weirder, more lo-fi. And when I'm going for kind of something that's more acoustic singer-songwritery, like what you mentioned, Return to Rest by Eleanor, like that track, I have kind of adopted a pretty go-to mic position for that has just always worked well for me for steel string.
Drop it on us.
Yeah. So I'll use like a large diaphragm condenser and I'll use a small diaphragm condenser and I'll put them in an XY pattern where the large diaphragm mic is pointed more towards the bridge and the small diaphragm pointed towards the fretboard.
Cool.
But I also like not necessarily having them be perfectly at 90 degrees. I'll have them facing a little bit more towards the guitar, and it just gives you a little bit more of an intimate and direct sound than when they're at 90 degrees properly. And I'll usually place that right at the neck joint, kind of away, like 10 inches or 12 inches from the guitar. And then I'll have to gain up the small diaphragm mic a little bit to match and feel balanced. But it sounds really cool to me, and I've always liked it more than like a traditional XY with small diaphragm mics. Having the different sound character of, a large and small diaphragm condenser, and then, just adjusting that angle a little bit to where it feels more direct. Because sometimes you lose that with stereo miking, where it doesn't feel like it's right in front of you and close and intimate anymore.
Yeah, I mean, not everything. So mono can be pretty good,
Yeah.
Even if it's just slightly wide mono, as opposed to like big deal stereo, which can also be cool sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of times too, you need one mic on acoustic and it sounds great. But when I'm doing stereo recording, that's been my go-to. I've experimented a lot and I still keep coming back to that method.
Now, if you were going to do that with a couple of the LEWITT mics, what might you try?
So the LCT1040 Pure is just a fantastic microphone, and it's very affordable. And I honestly, even though I have the more expensive models, I still come back to it because it just works and it sounds great. It gets a lot of good low-end warmth out of the acoustic too, as well as the high-end articulation. And then the LCT1040 Air, and I'll usually put that in air mode, which gives you a little more high-end.
That's the small diaphragm? That's the pencil mic?
Yeah, it's a pencil condenser. And so those two together, and I demonstrate that there's a LEWITT video about how to record acoustic guitar. So if you want to hear what that sounds like with those mics, you can just, check that video out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and we'll try and have a link to that in the show notes, Rockstar, so you can just scroll down and check it out. And there will be a link just over to LEWITT too, so you can scroll down and check that out too. Eastern Souvenirs, your band, great guitar tones on your record, electric guitar. You can talk about this if you want, but let's also just talk about how you get guitar sounds. So the question I had written down was talk about the difference between dialing in your own guitar sound on electric versus recording another band's guitars on electric, which is a little bit like that question about recording your own vocals versus somebody else's. But if you have any thoughts about that, great. And along with that, you talked about maybe using the 640 on electric guitar amps?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something for my most recent EP. The guitars were recorded on I have just an American Strat I've had for a long time. It's kind of my go-to electric guitar. And then I have a Fender Tweed Blues Junior. I had a kind of vintage twin reverb, and it was just way too big and heavy and annoying to carry around. So I sold it and got this little Blues Junior, and I love it. I think it sounds so great. It records well.
Twins are so loud, too.
Yeah.
They can get really loud.
Yeah, pretty brutal.
That's that whole thing that you learn, the difference between the amp you maybe need and want when you're playing a lot on stage versus the amps you start getting attracted to if you're spending a lot of time in the studio. They can be real different.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I recorded on the Blues Junior, sometimes like pretty minimal on pedals, especially on the most recent record. It was mainly just about spring reverb and kind of dialing in that, and did a lot of playing around kind of with that. And one thing that I ended up doing is actually not using a pedal or the amp reverb, but adding a spring reverb plugin to the dry recorded amp sound. I have the soft tube spring. I have the PSP spring box. And then honestly, the one that I've used the most is just the spring reverb plugin in Logic. They're like stock guitar spring reverb pedal. In boutique mode and then in bright mode, it just sounds exactly like what I want to hear right out of the gate. So I've yet to find a plugin I like better than that. So still searching, but yeah, that was a big part of the sound. And then I'd put the 640 kind of right in the center of the speaker, maybe slightly off a little bit, but I would stick it there, and then I would dial in the EQ based on what I was hearing through the speakers. So adjusting the treble and the mids, a little bit to find that right balance. And so I kind of approached it that way versus playing with mic positioning too much, because I basically wanted to start with like as much high end as I could get to have that clarity on some of the cleaner tones, and then kind of adjust with the tone on the amp when it's a little bit too biting in the mid range or something.
Yeah. Do you feel like you come up with slightly different sound coming out of the amp if you're doing a condenser mic to record it versus if you were just doing a 57?
For sure. Yeah. I think I tend to have to like adjust, like pull down the mids a little bit. And like, I'm trying to push more low and high end when I have the, like kind of trying to create a smiley face effect with the SM57 to get the full fidelity sound I want to hear, versus when I put the 640 on it, it just sounds good out of the gate, like how I want it. Especially, if I want a little bit more low end kind of warmth and, even a little more high end, the figure 8 pattern kind of scoops out the mid range in a really nice way.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so sometimes that's exactly what it needs. So I'll switch between either cardioid or figure 8.
Right. And with the 640, you can run both capsules back. You could have the amp and the mic out where the guitar is, but you bring both capsules back into the control room and then make your decisions at the speakers.
Yeah, exactly. But it's usually pretty obvious which way I'm going to go when I'm recording. Okay. So I'll usually commit to it, and then I record through kind of a Neve style clone preamp, the Heritage Audio one with EQ, and then into the Audioscape 76D compressor for just like a little bit of taming, particularly on clean tones. Wouldn't do that if it's a little bit more overdriven, but.
Okay, we are coming close to the end of our interview here, but let me ask you this question. This is much more nerdy studio stuff. You have a great website that you put together for yourself as an artist, as
Thanks.
a producer. It looks great. It seems very well thought out and arranged. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about stuff that you learned about doing that part of it well. Not having it be too much, having like the right balance of minimal and efficient and everything like that. How important is it for us as working producers and studio people to have a website?
I think it's, super important for people to have a good impression of your work, obviously, and having a solid website is a great way to establish that. I think, especially for me, I don't have all these like crazy, awesome credits. Some people, you go to their website and it's just a page with epic album covers and you're like, wait, they worked on that? And like, there's no other details except an email maybe. But I feel like when you're not quite at that level where you have all these names to drop, you need to offer a little bit more to the experience, to explain who you are and kind of what you bring to the table. Show your portfolio, but also give people information. I've also added, since I've done so much educational content, I've added a section of that too. And just,
Right, there's a tab called Mixing Tips where you just go over and it's just all these videos that you've created. But like on the landing page on the home screen, you've just got, there's a box that just says, get a quote,
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's a big thing, is just starting the conversation, because people want to just like, what is the price, right off the bat? And I'm happy to give them like a general, figure of what it would usually cost. But there's also a lot of other considerations, and I want to work with them, and I'd rather, a lot of cases, if it's really cool music, it's like, I want to make it happen. So let's work together. So you need to start a conversation to get there versus just putting everything out out front and being like, here's what it costs, period.
Yeah, it's tricky because people do start with I was curious about your rate, or what's your studio rate? That's what I get a lot because I have a studio. So people think about it as like coming in and tracking songs. And I find that, the answer is always to follow with the question. And I mean, it's, on the one hand, it can seem a little annoying. Sometimes I used to find it a little frustrating that, Sweetwater, which is a wonderful company, might want to ask me all these questions about my studio. I'm like, I just want to get the thing, whatever.
Yeah.
But I understand it now. Like really, the truth is you got to get a conversation going with the people you're going to work with. And you got to, a question is a powerful thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I convinced you to sit in that chair for 2 hours with nothing but a question.
Yeah. But yeah, going back to the website, just design and putting it forward, I just look at other mixers' websites and I'm always like, what? Their website looks amazing. Mine sucks. I need to fix it. And so I'll go on Squarespace. What would you like
to happen at your website next?
What would I like to happen?
Yeah, I'm taking a photo of Brian in real time right now, Rockstars, while he's sitting there in the chair on the mic. Yeah, like what would be your next upgrade for a website for yourself?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe you're all dialed in. Maybe you don't need any upgrades.
I think one thing that I want to sort out is just making it easier to, navigate like the genres that I typically work in and hearing sort of my best samples of that. Because I think that's one thing as an artist that you want to feel out with a mixer is like, does this person work within the aesthetic kind of the genre that I'm in? And
does this person get me?
Yeah, does this person get me? Is this going to work out? And so sometimes when you just have a long list of albums or pictures of album covers, it's hard to know, what that person works for, and you have to click through a bunch of links. So I think like I want to streamline the audio examples section to make that a little bit easier for people to immediately hear something they like and be like, oh, I could imagine how he might mix my record.
Yeah, and your discography page, it's got all these great album covers and stuff. And then if you click one, does it like take you to a player or something? Yeah, it does. It looks like it does.
Yeah, like Spotify or Bandcamp.
Bandcamp, yeah. So that's an easy way to do it. You just have a link embedded. You just click on it, it goes right to the place to hear it.
And then I have the Spotify playlist embedded too, because, a lot of times that's just the easiest way to get a quick sampling.
Yeah, exactly. Which was a reminder, Rockstars, we have a wonderful playlist discography for Brian's amazing record making in the show notes. You can just scroll right down and check that out and go listen after this interview because trust me, this stuff rocks and you're gonna want to make your record sound that good. This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. So let's go to closing questions. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to give a shout out to? Is there anything about your, any favorite tips or something, some wisdom you wanted to share with the rock stars or something about your studio? I'll race through it. So stuff we talk about, sometimes ask about like, favorite hardware or software or like business advice or organizing stuff for the studio. Anything pop to mind for you?
That's a good question. I think one thing that has come up, on Instagram. Like sometimes I'll get a random message from someone who finds me through a video or who knows, hashtag whatever. And I feel like I get so many questions about outboard gear because I have a few pieces in my studio, but I think it's an interesting topic because with Instagram, everything is so visual and outboard gear looks amazing. And so I think a lot of people get stuck on it and really transfixed by like, I want my studio to look as cool as this person's. And I mean, I guess the question I get a lot is like, what should I get? Should I get outboard gear? Is that important? How important is it? And I've even had people like be like, hey, do you recommend these Heritage Audio preamps? And I'm like, yes, I think they're great in my experience. They go buy them. They come back. They're like, it didn't sound as different as I thought it would, So I think one thing that I always try to be careful with is like these things, I think it is helpful to have a good preamp, but it's never going to drastically transform your sound. I think, microphones can more drastically affect your sound, and microphone placement can even more drastically affect your sound than, a specific brand of microphone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a combination of all these things. And when it comes down to it, you don't need to chase things that look cool. You just need to figure out and be honest with yourself about like what works for you. And so that's one thing that I constantly battle against. And I think a lot of people who do what I do, battle against is like, do I need to keep like ogling these like, expensive compressors and preamps or is that not actually holding me back? And I need to just like focus elsewhere and like, focus on the craft of what I'm doing and being creative with the tools I have. And so I don't know, that was one thing that definitely came to mind where, yes, I think it's important and fun to play with, but I think the difference between boutique preamps especially can be so subtle that I think a lot of people might be a little bit thrown off when they first venture into that and they think it's going to transform how their records sound.
Well, there's no doubt that gear makes a difference.
Yeah.
But it's also 100% true that we tend to default to the gear is going to make the record better difference, and that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
The things like the right decisions you make as a musician, engineer, producer, those are going to make a huge difference. And for me, I noticed that when I built my studio here and I went from being single to, at the time, a family of 5, I sort of did a little bit of a big leap all at once.
Yeah.
And I stopped buying, when I was single, it was just like all my money I went on eBay, that looks cool. And I just got gear. And then I had enough stuff, and I started my studio where it is now. And I stopped buying stuff for a while. And not encouraging you to not get some cool stuff, rock stars. But what I am saying is the moment I said to myself, I'm going to stick to this tool set for a little while, because that's really what it is. Our studio is like a tool set, right? Then all of a sudden I really advanced my ability to record because I started saying, all right, I'm going to give myself this limitation. Like, these are my tools. Now I'm going to figure out how to make everything sound good with what I got. And then I discovered like sound of instruments, mic placement, mixing, running a session just right,
and
so much stuff.
I try to not just hold on to stuff for the sake of having it. Like if I see something is sitting in the corner collecting dust, it's like, I'm like, I should just sell it for the sake of reducing clutter in this small home studio.
You're a better man than I. You're a much better man than me.
It can be hard to do, but I have to be realistic in I'm recording myself, sometimes doing vocal overdubs with people, but I don't need a billion, preamp options. I need a couple good options.
Well, your records sound amazing, so
you're doing
the
I really
right thing.
Appreciate that.
So let me jump to the closing question here. I like to ask all my guests this. This is hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back and find young Brian, who's tuning up his acoustic to plug into his Zoom, belt clip guitar amp to plug into his car stereo. and you want to give yourself this one bit of advice, and you say, listen, dude, I came back to give you this single bit of advice. Here's the thing you need to know, the single most important thing you need to know to become a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
Awesome. So I thought about this question because I know you ask it. And I think this applies to more than just, being a studio person, but also being an artist, is to really prioritize building friendships with other artists, other engineers, other mixers, and collaborating more. I think it's so easy to feel like you have to do everything yourself and be on this kind of island. But, I've just found collaborating with writing material or, asking someone else to sing on your record can be so fun, and it can elevate what you're doing so much when you get people involved. And another thing too is building friendships with other people that are, mixing too, other mixers in Boston that I can, relate to. And instead of seeing them as like a competitor who's competing for the same clients, just really seeing how valuable those connections are, and being able to bounce ideas. And yeah, just being a people person rather than kind of being on your own. Another thing I think is becoming more prevalent is artists thinking they have to do everything from writing and producing and arranging and mixing and mastering and releasing and promoting and booking. And yes, to some extent, you gotta make it happen. But you also, as much as you can, you need people to help. So make friends and do stuff together, and it'll be way more rewarding. And yeah, I think you'll get better results out of that. So that's what I think
that's evidenced just by that great story you told of working with Hector on drums.
Yeah.
And those drums sound amazing. You could have decided, I'm just going to try and play the drums myself, which is fun to do, but it's harder to do what you did, where you can
for sure
hear somebody play and adjust things while they're playing and stuff and work on it together. So that's cool, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's a pleasure to have you here on the show. Where can the Rockstars go to learn more about you? Where would you like them to go if they're ready to produce or mix their next great album, or if they got great questions? Maybe they just want to go watch your videos.
Yeah. So my website is Brian K. Fisher. So that's BRIAN K Fisher, FISHER.com. And so that's kind of my main portfolio website where you can find, videos, sound samples, and my email. Or, hit me up on Instagram. BKF Audio is my Instagram handle. So you can always shoot me a message there with questions.
Instagram seems to be a great place for people to just communicate easily.
Totally, yeah.
That's
probably more how I connect with, other artists and people these days is Instagram rather than via the website.
Awesome, dude. Well, great to see you in the studio. Rockstars, thanks for listening. Brian, we'll see you around the studio, dude.
All right, thanks.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: LEWITT, Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and iZotope. And remember, at iZotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes below, because it's a great great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.